Specialist Elena Ramirez had never thought of herself as unlucky, but when the reassignment orders landed on her desk, she couldn't shake the sinking feeling in her chest. She was being pulled from her infantry unit, stripped of the small camaraderie she had built, and reassigned to what soldiers jokingly called a graveyard post. Her new duty station wasn't glamorous. It wasn't near any city worth exploring, and it certainly wasn't the kind of place where medals were earned. The official line read, "Guard duty at Coastal Ammunition Depot, Sector 14. Ramirez had asked her sergeant what that meant exactly. He had smirked in the way seasoned NCOs do when they don't want to give away too much. "Means you'll be babysitting bullets in the middle of nowhere," he said. "Congratulations, Ramirez. Guess somebody upstairs trusts you not to fall." Asleep on watch, the word stung more than she admitted. She wasn't a screw-up. She had passed every qualification, put in the same sweat as everyone else in the field. But guard duty had a reputation. It was where they sent soldiers who weren't needed elsewhere. Or worse, soldiers who had made mistakes. She spent the long bus ride to the depot, trying to convince herself it wasn't punishment. Maybe it was. Important in ways people didn't see. After all, ammo didn't grow on trees. Every bullet, every missile, every crate shipped overseas had to come from somewhere. Somebody had to guard it. Still, when the depot finally came into view, she understood why most called it the assignment nobody wanted. The depot stretched across miles of coastal land, its perimeter marked by endless coils of barbed wire and tall fences topped with security cameras. Massive bunkers dotted the grounds, each built into the earth, disguised under grassy mounds like unnatural hills. Signs warned in bold red letters, "Authorized personnel, only use of deadly force authorized." The bus pulled through a series of security checkpoints, each slower than the last. Guards checked IDs, scanned fingerprints, and inspected even the bus driver's credentials. Inside, Ramirez caught her first glimpse of the personnel stationed there, a mix of Army MPs and logistics specialists. Their expressions carried the dull fatigue of routine. The depot commander gave the new arrivals a clipped briefing. His voice was flat, practiced, as though he had delivered it 100 times before. "You are here to maintain the integrity of this installation. Our mission is simple. Safeguard the munition stockpile stored on these grounds. You may think nothing happens here. That's fine. We want nothing to happen here. But make no mistake. What we protect is the backbone of American operations worldwide." Ramirez's ears caught that last part. The backbone of operations. She glanced at the sprawling bunkers again, suddenly aware of the scale. Each one could hold enough explosives to level half the county. It wasn't glamorous, but it was dangerous. In its own quiet way. Her quarters were a row of beige modular buildings, functional, uninspiring. Inside, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and dust. She unpacked her duffel onto the thin cot, her few personal belongings reduced to a framed photo of her mother, a Bible her grandmother insisted she carry, and a worn notebook where she scribbled her thoughts. Her first shift began the following evening. The guard rotation paired her with private meals, a lanky 19-year-old with a constant nervous laugh. They reported to the armory, signed out their rifles, and stepped into the humid night. The air smelled of salt and wet earth, the distant ocean muffled by thick forest surrounding the depot. Floodlights hummed across the perimeter, casting long shadows that seemed to twitch with every movement of the wind. Ramirez adjusted her Kevlar vest and gripped her M4, reminding herself to look sharp. The job was straightforward. Walk the fence line, check the locks, report anything unusual. Mills tried to fill the silence. "You know, they say nothing ever happens out here. Closest thing to action you'll get is chasing off a raccoon. 'My cousin was here 2 years ago, said it was like guarding a ghost town.'" Ramirez didn't reply at first. She focused on the dark tree line beyond the fence, where the world seemed to end in a wall of black. It wasn't lost on her that while Mills treated this like a joke, the commander had been clear. These munitions weren't just for show. If anyone wanted to cripple American forces overseas, hitting a stockpile like this would be a smart place. To start, she finally answered, her tone low. Doesn't matter if nothing happens. If we slack off, and something does, it'll be too late. Mills gave a half-hearted chuckle. You sound like the field manual. But her words weren't for him. They were for herself. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the crunch of gravel under boots and the occasional static from their radios. At checkpoints, Ramirez signed her name in logbooks, recording each hour with meticulous care. She wasn't about to let anyone say she didn't take her post seriously. When her shift ended at 0200, she returned to her quarters exhausted but restless. Lying on her cot, she stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of generators outside. She thought of her old unit, their nights spent huddled together in the field, joking to keep the cold away. Here, there was no laughter, no sense of brotherhood. Just silence and the heavy responsibility of guarding weapons meant for wars she might never see. Days bled into each other. Wake, patrol, eat, patrol again. It was monotonous work, but Ramirez clung to a sense of pride. She refused to treat it as meaningless. She polished her boots, maintained her rifle with care, and walked. Her roots with sharp eyes. Others might mock the depot as a backwater post, but she believed in the idea that discipline mattered, even in obscurity. Still, doubt crept in during quiet moments. Was this all her army career would be? Walking fences and checking locks, wow. Others earned medals overseas. She tried to silence the thoughts, but they echoed louder in the emptiness. One evening, she found herself pausing near a bunker entrance, staring at the fixed steel door, bolted shut with electronic locks. Behind it lay crates of ammunition, thousands of rounds that would one day be fired by soldiers just like her. She wondered if her former squad would ever fire bullets she had once guarded. The thought gave her a strange sense of connection, invisible but real. That night, as she wrote in her notebook, she admitted something she hadn't dared say aloud. Maybe this assignment wasn't punishment after all. Maybe it was trust. The army couldn't afford to put careless soldiers here. They needed people who would stay alert when nothing seemed to matter. Ramirez closed the notebook, placed it under her pillow, and turned off the light. She didn't know it yet, but her instincts were right. Guarding the depot was more than a footnote in her career. It was the front line of a fight that hadn't revealed itself yet. For now, the assignment still looked like the one nobody wanted. But soon, everything would change. The first thing Ramirez noticed about the nights at the depot was how quiet they were. Not the kind of quiet that came from peace, but the heavy, suffocating silence that seemed to listen back at you. The kind that made you think every rustle. In the brush, every creak of the chain-link fence was a sign of something watching. Her first solo night patrol began just after 2300. The humid air clung to her skin, and the floodlights hummed overhead, buzzing with moths drawn to their glow. She slung her rifle across her chest, tightened her grip, and started the long walk along the outer perimeter road. The depot stretched endlessly into the darkness, row after row of bunkers rising like earthen mounds under the moonlight. Each was sealed shut with thick steel doors and electronic locks. She had been briefed that some of the bunkers stored small arms, ammunition, others mortar rounds, some even rockets and explosives. Every door represented destruction, waiting for the right or wrong hands. Ramirez moved carefully, scanning with her flashlight. The beam swept over fences topped with razor wire, security cameras rotating slowly, and warning signs screaming in red. The sight never failed to remind her of the stakes. She wasn't guarding a warehouse full of spare boots. She was guarding the power to wage war. At first, the monotony seemed to stretch time itself. She walked, she checked locks, she scribbled. In her logbook, the radio on her shoulder hissed with the occasional check-in from command. Sector 14, status? All clear, she replied, her voice steady, but the silence had a way of playing tricks. The forest beyond the perimeter shifted with the wind, branches creaking, shadows twisting. Twice, she thought she heard footsteps. Both times, when she swept her light into the trees, there was nothing but the flutter of leaves and the shrill call of a night bird. She reminded herself of what Private Mills had said. Most nights here, the biggest threat was wildlife. Still, she refused to lower her guard. If her mother had taught her anything growing up, it was that real danger often came the moment you convinced yourself there was none. By 0100, the air had cooled, carrying the briny scent of the nearby ocean. Ramirez paused at a guard tower to check in with another soldier, a broad-shouldered corporal half asleep at his post. He waved lazily, barely looking up from his coffee. "Nothing ever happens here," he muttered. Ramirez gave a polite nod, but his words irritated her. It wasn't about whether something happened. It was about being ready in case it did. As she resumed her patrol, she thought back to training. Drill sergeants hammering discipline into recruits. Stay alert. Trust your equipment. Don't get complacent. She had carried those lessons into every posting, but here, more than anywhere, complacency seemed like the enemy. The depot's design didn't make things easier. The perimeter was long, the lighting uneven. In some stretches, the shadows seemed to swallow the ground, leaving blind spots where anyone or anything could hide. Ramirez noted each weak point carefully in her log, planning to report them later. At 0200, she reached the far corner of the fence line, where the depot met a dense wall of pine trees. The wind had died, leaving the night eerily still. She stopped, scanning the trees. For a moment, she could have sworn she saw movement, a dark shape slipping between the trunks. Her pulse quickened as she raised her rifle instinctively, finger brushing the trigger guard. "Sector 14 to command," she whispered into her radio. "Possible movement along the northern perimeter. Investigating." Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating only undergrowth and damp earth. She advanced a few steps, her boots sinking into soft mud. The shape was gone, if it had ever been there at all. The radio crackled back. "Copy, Sector 14. Stay vigilant. Could be wildlife." Ramirez lowered her rifle, but didn't relax. She swept her light across the tree line again, forcing herself to study every shadow until her eyes ached. After several long minutes of silence, she marked the spot in her log and resumed patrol. Back at the barracks the next morning, Private Mills laughed when she told him, "Probably a raccoon. Or a deer. You'll get used to it." But Ramirez wasn't so sure. The shape had seemed deliberate, purposeful. It didn't move like an animal. The following night, her unease grew. She walked the same routes, logged the same checkpoints, but the memory of that dark figure lingered in her mind. She noticed how often the cameras panned away at just the wrong moment, leaving gaps in coverage. She noticed how long it took for the radio to respond when she checked in. And she noticed something else, the way the bunkers seemed to hum with potential energy. Each one held enough firepower to fuel months of conflict. What if someone wanted to take it? What if someone already was? She shook the thought away, but it clung to her. One evening, as the sun set in a smear of orange across the horizon, she paused outside Bunker 7, one of the largest. She placed her palm against the cool steel door, imagining the crates stacked inside. She pictured Marines' overseas firing rounds that had once been guarded here by her. For the first time, she felt a strange sense of pride. She wasn't just pacing fences, she was protecting lives she'd never meet. Her journal entries grew longer that week. She wrote about the silence, the unease, the moments she swore she wasn't alone. She wrote about how the other guards laughed it off, treating the depot like a prison sentence. But for her, every shift felt heavier, as though the night itself was daring her to let down her guard. And still, she didn't. She walked. She watched. She kept her eyes sharp when others blinked. On her sixth night, while the wind rattled the fence and the floodlights flickered briefly, she made herself a promise. If something happened, if someone came, she would be ready. She didn't know then how soon that promise would be tested, or how much depended on the watchful eyes of one soldier in the dead of night. A mess hall at the Coastal Ammunition Depot was the kind of place where monotony collected like dust. The same plastic trays, the same lukewarm coffee, the same soldiers in faded fatigues bent over plates of eggs or reheated rations. For Specialist Elena Ramirez, it was just another morning after another long, restless night. She sat at the end of a table, pushing scrambled eggs around with her fork when the whispers started. "Did you hear?" one of the logistics clerks muttered, leaning close to his buddy. "They say a Navy SEAL commander is coming here." His friend scoffed. "A SEAL commander? To this place? What for? Inspect raccoon traps?" A ripple of laughter spread across the table. Ramirez kept her eyes on her food, but her ears sharpened. She had learned in the army that rumors always had roots, even if the details got twisted. Soldiers didn't invent stories about elite officers visiting a backwater post like this for fun. Another voice chimed in. "Nah, I heard he's checking on a shipment. Supposedly, there's ordnance coming in that's classified higher than usual." "Classified? Here?" The skeptic chuckled. "Come on. This depot's where the army sends soldiers to die of boredom. Why would command waste a SEAL on us?" The talk grew louder, soldiers tossing theories like playing cards. Some said it was just an inspection tour. Others whispered about covert training exercises. A few even suggested it might have to do with foreign intelligence, Chinese or Russian operatives targeting U.S. supply chains. Ramirez didn't join the conversation. She simply listened, absorbing every word. Her fork hovered above her plate, untouched. Why would a SEAL commander come here? The question dug into her like a splinter. Later that afternoon, she sat in the guard shack, scribbling notes in her logbook. The shack smelled faintly of mildew. An instant coffee, its walls plastered with outdated safety posters. Mills lounged in the corner, playing with his phone, oblivious to the rules against it. "You believe all that crap?" he asked without looking up. Ramirez glanced at him. "About what?" "The SEAL guy. Commander or whatever. Everyone's acting like he's coming to save us from boredom." Mills smirked. "Bet you it's just some colonel doing a box check." "Maybe," Ramirez said, though her tone betrayed doubt. She tapped her pen against the page. "But think about it. Why would they even spread the word if it wasn't true? This place thrives on routine. They don't like surprises here." Mills shrugged. "Maybe the brass got tired of us falling asleep on shift." He laughed at his own joke, but Ramirez didn't. Her mind kept circling back to the rumors. In her gut, she felt there was more to it. That night, during her patrol, she caught herself imagining what kind of man this commander might be. The word SEAL carried a weight of its own images of silent professionals slipping into hostile waters, executing missions no one else dared to attempt. Men who had seen combat in corners of the world most people couldn't even point to one. A map. She wondered if he would see this place the way she did, not as a forgotten outpost, but as a quiet front line. Or would he laugh like Mills at the absurdity of guarding crates of bullets in the middle of nowhere? Her boots crunched the gravel as she rounded a corner, the floodlights stretching her shadow long against the fence. She tightened her grip on her rifle, scanning the tree line beyond. She remembered the dark shape she thought she'd seen the other night, the one everyone dismissed as an animal. A SEAL commander wouldn't dismiss it, she thought. He'd notice, he'd care. And the strange thing was she felt comfort in that idea. By the end of the week, the rumors had grown into certainties. Soldiers were now speaking with the confidence of prophets. He's arriving in a convoy, one said, with a full security detail. No, another argued, he's coming alone. SEALs don't roll with fanfare. The dining hall buzzed with speculation, and even the usually unflappable depot commander seemed tighter in his movements, issuing orders with clipped urgency. Security protocols were updated. Patrol schedules were shifted. Every soldier was told to look sharp, as if expecting an inspection that could decide the fate of their careers. Mills groaned when the new schedule was posted. All this for one guy? Come on. But Ramirez felt something else entirely. Anticipation. She found herself cleaning her rifle twice that night, checking and rechecking her gear. She pressed her uniform flat, polished her boots until they reflected light. If a SEAL commander was coming, she wanted to look the part of a soldier who cared. Not because she wanted his approval, but because she wanted to prove to herself, as much as to anyone, that this place mattered. 2 days later, the atmosphere shifted. Even before anyone saw the convoy, they felt it. Soldiers moved with restless energy. Conversations grew clipped, and the radios buzzed with coded chatter. Ramirez was on duty when the call came through. Convoy inbound. All guards to positions. Her heart kicked against her ribs. She straightened, gripping her rifle tight. The sun had just begun to sink, painting the horizon in bruised shades of purple and red. Moments later, headlights pierced the dusk. A line of unmarked black SUVs rolled through the gates, tires crunching gravel, engines low and powerful. The kind of vehicles you didn't mistake for casual visitors. Every soldier in sight stiffened to attention. Ramirez's throat went dry. This was it. The rumors had been true. As the convoy slowed, the lead SUV's door opened, and a man stepped out. He wasn't tall, but his presence was immediate, broad-shouldered, fit, the kind of build that spoke of years of discipline rather than vanity. His uniform was unadorned, his face clean-shaven, his eyes sharp as they scanned the depot like a hawk assessing terrain. Conversations died instantly. Even the air seemed to pause. Ramirez stood at attention as the man's gaze swept across the line of guards. When his eyes met hers, just for a second, she felt as though he saw more than a uniform. He saw her readiness, her tension, the way her grip tightened on her weapon. He gave the faintest of nods before moving on. It was nothing, just a gesture, but Ramirez felt her stomach twist with a strange, sudden certainty. This man hadn't come here by chance. Something was happening. And the quiet monotony of the depot was about to shatter. The convoy's engines quieted, leaving only the hum of the depot's floodlights and the distant drone of cicadas. Soldiers shifted uneasily, their boots crunching against gravel as they stood at attention. The presence of unmarked SUVs alone would have been enough to break the monotony of life at the coastal ammunition depot. But the man who stepped out of the lead vehicle shifted the air itself. The SEAL commander didn't carry himself with the stiff, parade ground posture of most senior officers. His movements were deliberate, efficient, like a predator conserving energy until it was time to strike. His uniform bore the muted patches of Navy service, but without the show of medals or unnecessary decoration. Everything about him was stripped to purpose. He scanned the depot in silence, his eyes flicking from guard towers to perimeter fences to the bunkers half buried in the earth. It wasn't a casual glance, it was an assessment, as though he were building a tactical map in his mind. He didn't Need introductions to know where the weaknesses were. The depot commander, a gray-haired army colonel, stepped forward to greet him. His voice carried a forced steadiness. "Commander Briggs, welcome to Sector 14. We're honored by your presence." Briggs gave a curt nod, no wasted words. He wasn't here for ceremony. From her post near the southern fence line, Specialist Elena Ramirez watched the exchange with a kind of reverent curiosity. She'd seen plenty of officers before, some distant and detached, others overbearing with authority. But this man was different. He radiated control without needing to raise his voice. Even from a distance, Ramirez could feel it. He didn't view this depot as a sleepy assignment. He saw it as a battlefield waiting to reveal itself. The convoy unloaded several sealed cases equipment, perhaps, though no one said what. Navy personnel moved quickly, blending with the depot's soldiers, but carrying themselves with the quiet efficiency of men used to working in shadows. Ramirez noticed details others ignored, how their eyes never stopped scanning, how they positioned themselves instinctively with their backs to solid walls, how they never let their hands drift far from their sidearms. Whispers traveled down the ranks. "What's in the cases?" "Looks like comms gear." "No, I heard it's surveillance." "Equipment." Ramirez ignored the speculation. She kept her eyes on Briggs. After his exchange with the colonel, Briggs walked the perimeter himself. He didn't wait for an escort. He moved along the fence line, boots sinking slightly into the damp earth, his gaze dissecting the depot's defenses. When he reached Ramirez's sector, she snapped to attention, rifle across her chest. "Specialist," he said, his voice low but clear. "Sir," she replied, heart hammering. He studied her for a beat too long, his gaze steady but unreadable. Then he asked the question no one else had ever bothered to ask her in months of guard duty. "What do you see when you look out there?" He gestured toward the dark tree line. Beyond the floodlights. Caught off guard, Ramirez blinked. "Trees, sir. Dense cover. Blind spots between towers. Potential concealment." His expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened with interest. "And what do you think that means?" She swallowed, pulse racing. "It means the depot isn't as secure as it looks, sir." For the first time, something like approval flickered across his face. He gave a short nod and moved on, leaving her standing rigid, adrenaline buzzing in her veins. He hadn't dismissed her answer. He had valued it. That night, the atmosphere across the depot shifted. Briggs' presence was like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading in every erection. Soldiers who had once joked about raccoons and deer now walked their patrols with sharper eyes. The lazy rhythm of monotony was broken, replaced with tension they couldn't explain. Ramirez felt it most of all. Every sound in the forest seemed louder, every shadow sharper. She replayed Briggs' question in her mind. "What do you see when you look out there?" She realized now that her job wasn't just about walking fences. It was about seeing what others ignored. Over the next several days, Briggs made his presence felt without fanfare. He appeared in unexpected places one moment, observing guards at the armory, the next standing silently in a tower at 0300, watching the perimeter through binoculars. He asked questions pointed, uncomfortable ones. How long does it take for a patrol to respond to a breach on the northern side? Who has access to the bunker keys at any given hour? Where are the dead zones in camera coverage? No one liked answering him, because his questions exposed flaws. But Ramirez noticed something. Briggs never asked to embarrass anyone. He asked because he already knew the answers. He wanted to see who else did. When he crossed her path again during a shift change, he paused. "You wrote a report about weak lighting near Sector 7. "Yes, sir," Ramirez said, surprised he'd read it. "You were the only one." His gaze held hers. "Keep writing. Don't assume no one reads." And then he was gone again, leaving her with the unsettling but motivating realization that her vigilance mattered. Mills, of course, complained. Guy's a ghost, popping up everywhere, asking questions like we're supposed to have all the answers. You ask me, he's just trying to make himself look important. Ramirez shook her head. He's not wasting time. He's preparing for something. Mills snorted. Preparing for what? No one's dumb enough to hit an ammo depot. But Ramirez wasn't convinced. The turning point came one evening when Briggs called a small group of guards, including Ramirez, to a briefing in the depot's operations room. The walls were lined with security monitors, showing grainy footage of fences, gates, and bunkers. Briggs stood at the front, arms crossed, eyes hard. This facility is not as secure as your reports suggest, he said flatly. Your patrol. Schedules are predictable. Your cameras have blind spots large enough to drive a truck through. And your response times are slow. Murmurs rippled through the room, but no one dared argue. Briggs continued. The enemy doesn't hit where you're strong. They hit where you're weak. Right now, this depot is weak. That changes starting tonight. He outlined new drills, randomized patrols, and faster communication protocols. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. And though technically he had no direct command over Army personnel, no one questioned him. When the meeting ended, Ramirez lingered as the others filed out. She approached Briggs cautiously. Sir, she said, do you believe someone will try to breach us? He met her gaze, and for a moment, she thought he might actually answer. Instead, he said, I believe in being ready before the threat arrives. That's the difference between surviving and failing. Then he walked past her, leaving her with a chill that settled deep in her bones. That night, Ramirez walked her patrol differently. She moved with sharper focus, her eyes drawn to the tree line, her ears straining at every sound. The depot no longer felt like a forgotten assignment. It felt like a battlefield waiting for its first shot. And though she didn't know when or how, she believed Briggs was right. Something was coming. And when it did, her watchfulness would matter more than ever. The depot had always been predictable. Wake at 0600, muster at 0700. Patrol schedules posted neatly on the bulletin board, rotating in the same cycle week after week. The soldiers joked they could walk their patrols blindfolded, every turn memorized. It wasn't discipline that drove the routine, it was habit. The kind of habit that dulled edges and lulled even the sharpest into boredom. But with Commander Briggs' arrival, all of that changed. The first sign came 3 nights after his convoy rolled in. Ramirez had barely finished logging her first checkpoint when a shadow moved at the edge of her vision. Her heart leapt. She raised her rifle, scanning only to see Briggs himself, standing silently under the floodlights like a ghost. Sector clear? He asked, his tone even. Yes, sir, Ramirez answered, lowering her weapon. His eyes swept the fence line, then returned to her. When you walk this patrol, do you always start clockwise? She hesitated. Yes, sir, that's the schedule. Then the enemy knows your route before you do, Briggs said flatly. He turned and walked away, leaving her staring after him, pulse still racing. The next night, she changed direction. Word spread quickly that Briggs was appearing at random places, random hours. Some soldiers started calling him the Phantom. He would materialize behind a guard on post, ask a pointed question about their sector, then vanish again. Sometimes, he left only silence, other times a sharp critique. Private Mills hated it. Guy's paranoid. He grumbled one morning, slumping into the mess hall. Keeps asking me how fast I can get to the North Gate if it's breached. I told him 3 minutes. He said I'd already be dead. Ramirez hid a smirk. She knew. Briggs wasn't trying to scare them. He was trying to wake them up. And for her, at least, It was working. 2 weeks into Briggs' presence, the depot barely resembled its former self. Patrols were randomized, forcing soldiers to learn every inch of the perimeter rather than just their assigned routes. Radio check-ins were no longer hourly, but staggered, unpredictable. Drill scenarios, surprise alarms, blackout conditions, mock breaches were sprung at odd hours. At first, the soldiers complained. Sleep was cut, routines shattered, comfort stripped away. But gradually, the complaints faded. The grumbling gave way to sharper movements, quicker responses, keener eyes. Briggs was reshaping them, turning a sleepy garrison into something resembling a combat-ready unit, and Ramirez found herself thriving under it. One rainy evening, Briggs intercepted her as she returned from patrol, boots caked with mud. "Specialist," he said, handing her a laminated map of the depot. "Mark the 3 weakest points in perimeter security. Don't overthink it." She scanned the map quickly, circling the blind spot near Tower 5, the broken floodlight in Sector 7, and the overgrown brush along the northern fence line. She handed it back. Briggs glanced at her choices, gave the faintest nod, and said, "Good, you're starting to see it." She wanted to ask see what, but he had already turned, speaking to another soldier. That night, lying in her cot, Ramirez realized what he meant. She was starting to see the depot the way he did, not as a place where nothing happened, but as a place where something could. The shift didn't just change patrols. It changed conversations. In the mess hall, instead of joking about raccoons, soldiers discussed response times, coverage gaps, and the fastest way to move between bunkers. They compared notes on Briggs' questions, trying to anticipate the next drill. Even Mills, though he still complained, began keeping his rifle cleaner and his reports more thorough. But Ramirez noticed a deeper difference in herself. The gnawing doubt that had plagued her, the fear that guard duty was meaningless, that her career had been sidelined, was fading. She felt sharper, more purposeful. When she walked the fence line now, she wasn't just counting minutes until the shift ended. She was training her eyes, her instincts, her discipline. And all of it, she knew, was because of Briggs. One night, near 0200, the depot fell into blackout. Every floodlight cut at once, plunging the grounds into pitch darkness. Soldiers scrambled, radios hissing, flashlights cutting erratic beams across the fences. Ramirez was mid-patrol when her radio crackled. "This is a drill. Respond as if hostile forces have cut power. Maintain perimeter. Report breaches immediately." Her pulse surged, but her training, Briggs' training, took over. She dropped to a knee, rifle raised, scanning through night vision goggles. She moved toward Tower 5, the known blind spot, her boots whispering against wet gravel. In the chaos, she spotted Briggs moving silently along the fence line. No flashlight, no wasted motion. He was testing them, watching how they reacted. By the time power was restored 20 minutes later, sweat ran down Ramirez's back despite the cold. Her sector was secure, her logbook precise, her hands steady. Briggs passed her afterward, eyes meeting hers briefly. "Good work." 2 words, but they carried more weight than any medal she'd ever dreamed of. The drills grew harder. Briggs introduced simulated intrusions, sending his men to cut mock breaches in fences, plant decoy devices, even stage false alarms near bunkers. The depot was no longer a quiet backwater. It was a crucible. Ramirez rose to each challenge. She ran harder, moved faster, reacted quicker. And slowly, she noticed something strange. When others faltered, they began looking to her. It wasn't official. She wasn't in charge. But her steadiness under pressure stood out, and in the eyes of her peers, it mattered. Mills, after one particularly grueling drill, slapped her shoulder. "I don't know how you keep so calm out there. You're like a damn machine." "I'm not calm," she admitted. "I just don't let it show." He grinned, shaking his head. "Guess that's why Briggs likes you." The comment caught her off guard, but she didn't answer. Late one night, Ramirez found herself on the catwalk above Bunker 12, the air heavy with salt from the ocean. Briggs approached quietly, leaning against the rail beside her. "You've adjusted faster than most," he said without preamble. She stared out at the floodlit rows of bunkers. "I just take the job seriously, sir. Plenty of soldiers say that. Few mean it." She glanced at him, surprised by the edge of respect in his tone. "Why here, sir? Why this depot?" For a long moment, Briggs didn't answer. Then he said quietly, "Because this place isn't as forgotten as it looks, and neither are you." Before she could respond, he pushed off the rail and walked away, leaving her with 100 questions burning in her chest. By the end of a month, the depot was unrecognizable. Schedules were unpredictable. Guards were sharper. Reports were thicker. And Ramirez herself felt transformed. She no longer doubted her posting, no longer wondered if she had been sidelined. She knew, now that she was part of something critical, something fragile, something worth guarding with her life. Briggs had lit a fire in the heart of the depot, and it burned brightest in her. But deep inside, Ramirez also sensed the truth. Drills and discipline weren't just for show. Briggs wasn't training them for if something happened. He was training them for when. The storm rolled in without warning. Thick black clouds swallowed the moon, and rain hammered the depot like 1,000 fists against metal and earth. The floodlights blurred into halos through the downpour, visibility shrinking with every gust of wind. Specialist Ramirez tugged her poncho tighter, though it did little against the sheets of water soaking her uniform. Her boots squelched in the mud as she walked the southern fence line, rifle hugged close to her chest. The storm felt alive, pressing in from every direction, drowning out the usual quiet hum of insects and night birds. Her radio crackled with static, then the clipped voice of the watch officer. "All units maintain standard patrols. Visibility low. Report anything unusual immediately." Unusual. In this storm, everything felt unusual. Half an hour into her patrol, the depot's calm shattered. A sharp electronic beep cut through the static in her earpiece. One of the outer motion sensors had tripped. Her heart slammed into her ribs. She ducked under a bunker overhang, pulling out her notepad to confirm the alert. Sector 9, Northern. Perimeter. Her thumb pressed the radio button. "This is Specialist Ramirez. Motion sensor triggered, Sector 9, North Fence." Static swallowed her words, the storm choking the signal. She tried again. "Sector 9, possible breach." This time, her call got through. The watch officer's voice was strained. "Copy, Specialist. Maintain position until backup arrives." But another voice cut in, steady and unmistakable. "Briggs, negative. Hold your post. I'm en route to Sector 9. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the tree line for a heartbeat." Ramirez squinted into the darkness, rain streaming into her eyes. For an instant, she thought she saw movement shadows slipping between trees, too deliberate to be wind. Her pulse raced. She moved quickly but carefully, boots sinking into sodden earth, rifle raised. The storm muffled sound, but her senses felt sharper than ever. Every lesson Briggs had hammered into them surged forward. Don't rely on routine. Don't assume silence means safety. See what others miss. As she approached the northern fence, she found what she dreaded, the wire, sagging, slick with rain. At first, she thought it was the storm's doing. But when she crouched closer, flashlight beam cutting through the rain, her stomach dropped. The chain link had been cut clean, not torn, not rusted, cut. She touched the edge, it was fresh. Her radio hissed again. Briggs' voice, closer now. Specialist, report. Ramirez forced her voice steady. Fence breach confirmed. Sector 9. Wire's been cut. Silence for a heartbeat. Then, stay put. Eyes up. Do not engage until I'm with you. She swallowed hard, scanning the tree line. Shapes moved in the dark too fast to be deer. Whoever they were already inside. Minutes stretched like hours. Rain lashed her face, her hands slick against her rifle grip. Her ears strained for footsteps, but the storm drowned everything. Then a figure appeared through the downpour, moving with calm precision. Briggs. He carried no umbrella, no poncho, only his rifle, and the same controlled presence had always unnerved her. He crouched beside her, eyes flicking to the cut fence. Then the tree line. His voice was low but firm. Good work spotting it. They're here. Her stomach tightened. How many? Doesn't matter, Briggs said. His gaze never left the darkness. What matters is that they don't reach the bunkers. Ramirez nodded, throat dry. The depot erupted. Shouts over radios. Floodlights straining to pierce the storm. Guards. Sprinting across mud-slicked ground. The alarm klaxons wailed, echoing off bunkers like a scream. Ramirez and Briggs moved as one, advancing along the fence line. Lightning flashed, and for an instant, Ramirez saw them 3 figures dressed. In dark gear, darting through the trees. Armed. Gunfire cracked, sharp against the roar of rain. Dirt kicked up inches from her boots. She dropped to her belly, heart hammering, returning fire with steady bursts. Briggs fired beside her, his shots measured, controlled, not a single round wasted. Keep them pinned, he barked. Ramirez obeyed, focusing on suppressing fire. Every lesson from the drill's timing, breathing, sight picture came alive. She wasn't a forgotten guard anymore. She was a soldier under fire. The intruders pressed harder, trying to push toward this bunkers. Their movements were coordinated, professional. Whoever they weren't amateurs. Briggs keyed his radio. North perimeter engaged. Multiple hostiles. Contain and flank. The response was immediate. Patrol teams converged, rifles. Barking through the storm. The depot wasn't the sleepy backwater it had once been. It was ready, hardened by weeks of drills, sharpened by Briggs' relentless standards. Ramirez held her sector, firing until the intruders broke and fled into the tree line. 2 went down, dragged by the storm. 1 disappeared into the forest. The gunfire ebbed, leaving only the storm's fury. Ramirez lay in the mud, chest heaving, rain mixing with sweat on her face. She was alive. The depot was intact. And 4. The first time, she knew the drills hadn't been paranoia. They'd been prophecy. Briggs stood, scanning the tree line with narrowed eyes. They'll try again, he muttered, almost to himself. Ramirez pushed to her feet, rifle still steady. Despite her trembling arms. Who were they? He glanced at her, rain dripping from his brow. The kind of people who know what this depot holds. And the kind of people who'll kill to get it. Her pulse quickened. She wanted to ask more, but Briggs had already keyed his radio again, issuing orders to lock down the facility, secure the breach, and account for every round of ammunition. Within minutes, the depot transformed. Guards doubled at every bunker. Vehicles roared to life, sweeping the perimeter. Spotlights lit the tree line in harsh beams. Ramirez found herself assigned to hold the breach site. As soldiers reinforced, the fence with coils of razor wire, she stayed at the ready, scanning the storm. Every flicker of movement set her nerves alight. Briggs passed her once, pausing briefly. His eyes met hers, steady and unyielding. You did well, he said. Your vigilance bought us time. Then he moved on, already thinking 3 steps ahead. Hours later, the storm began to break. The rain softened, the clouds thinning to reveal a pale dawn on the horizon. The depot was battered but unbroken. Ramirez stood soaked to the bone, exhausted, but her rifle never left her hands. She replayed the night's events in her mind. The cut fence, the shadows in the trees, the firefight in the mud. For months, she had wondered if her post meant anything. Now she knew. Her watch had mattered. Her eyes had mattered. Her presence had mattered, because tonight the depot hadn't fallen. And in the silence after the storm, she realized something else. This was only the beginning. The depot didn't sleep after the breach. When dawn finally broke over the coastline, the air was heavy with damp earth and burnt powder. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered, puddles pooling in ruts, mud clinging to boots, water dripping from the razor wire hastily wrapped around the repaired fence. The klaxons had stopped, but tension hung thicker than the mist rolling in from the ocean. Specialist Ramirez hadn't closed her eyes since the night before. She stood watch over Sector 9, the site of the breach, rain-soaked uniform stiff against her skin. Her body ached, eyelids heavy, but her mind burned with an alertness she couldn't shake. Every crack of a twig, every rustle in the brush had her fingers tightening around her rifle. Behind her, soldiers moved with newfound urgency. What had once been a half-forgotten posting had transformed overnight into a frontline outpost. Patrols doubled, towers manned with belt-fed weapons, searchlights sweeping every 5 minutes instead of every 30. Vehicles idling near the gates, ready to respond at a moment's notice. The depot had always carried the weight of its cargo munitions stacked in bunkers, enough firepower to supply entire battalions overseas, but now the weight felt real, pressing against every man and woman guarding it. They had been tested, and they knew the test wasn't over. Briggs had been everywhere since the firefight. Ramirez caught glimpses of him at all hours leaning over maps in the command post, walking the perimeter with night vision goggles, checking locks on the bunkers himself. His face gave nothing away, but his movements were sharper, faster. If he had ever treated the depot like a training ground, he no longer did. This was war footing. During the morning briefing, he addressed the gathered guards in the mess hall, his voice carrying the weight of authority that needed no microphone. Last night wasn't random, he said. Whoever those intruders were, they came prepared, coordinated, armed. They didn't just stumble into this depot, they targeted it. Which means they'll try again. A ripple of unease moved through the room, but Briggs didn't soften the blow. He let the silence stretch, then continued. You did well holding them back. But don't mistake survival for victory. Survival only tells us we've bought time. What matters now is how we use it. His gaze swept the room, lingering on each soldier. When his eyes met Ramirez's, she felt the same jolt she had when he first asked her about the tree line weeks ago, as though he could see straight through her fatigue, straight into the core of her. From this point forward, he said, this depot operates under wartime protocol. Schedules are gone. Routines are gone. Every second, every step, every decision counts. If you don't like it, transfer out. But if you stay, you hold this line like your life depends on it, because it does. And so does this country's. No one spoke. No one moved. The silence was its own kind of oath. The following days blurred into a cycle of intensity, unlike anything Ramirez had known. Patrols stretched longer, routes randomized not just nightly but hourly. Drills doubled in frequency. Ammunition issued live, not blanks. Guards rotated through the towers in overlapping shifts, ensuring no section of the perimeter was left thin. Sleep became a luxury, meals taken in rushed bites between rotations. Soldiers who had once dragged their feet now moved with purpose, back straight, eyes alert. Even Mills, once the depot's loudest complainer, worked without protest, his usual sarcasm replaced with grim determination. And in the middle of it all was Briggs, tireless, unyielding. He demanded more from them than they thought they had to give, but he gave just as much, always present, always watching, always in the thick of it. For Ramirez, exhaustion warred with clarity. Every hour tested her, pushing her to the edge of her limits. But at the edge, she found something new. Resolve. She was no longer just following orders. She was protecting something bigger than herself. On the fourth night after the breach, Ramirez was assigned to a joint patrol with Briggs himself. They moved along the southern fence, boots squelching in soft earth, the ocean wind carrying salt and mist across the depot. Briggs said little. At first, scanning the darkness with his night vision scope. Finally, he spoke. "What did you feel the moment you saw the cut wire?" Ramirez hesitated. "Fear, sir, but also clarity. Like everything we drilled for finally made sense." Briggs gave a faint nod. "Fear isn't weakness. It's information. Weakness is ignoring it." She swallowed, the words settling in her chest. "Do you think they'll come back soon?" "They have to," he said simply. "They failed, but they won't leave empty-handed. This depot is too valuable. That means we prepare for them like they'll hit tonight." His calm certainty made her stomach knot, but it also steadied her. If he wasn't panicked, neither would she be. The attack didn't come that night, nor the next. But the waiting was its own kind of battle. The silence stretched taut, every hour without contact, ratcheting tension higher. Soldiers flinched at false alarms, branches snapping, wildlife triggering sensors, shadows mistaken for intruders. Each time, hearts pounded, adrenaline spiked, then ebbed into weary relief. Ramirez found herself caught between two realities: the exhaustion that threatened to drag her under, and the razor-sharp vigilance that kept her upright. It was a thin, dangerous balance. Briggs seemed immune to it, but she knew even he had to feel the weight. One evening, while reinforcing the fence near Sector 9, Ramirez overheard two sergeants muttering. "This is insane," one said. "We can't keep this tempo up forever. We're running ourselves into the ground." "Maybe that's the point," the other replied. "Break us before the enemy does." Ramirez bit her tongue, focusing on her work. She understood their frustration. She felt it too, but she also understood what Briggs was doing. If they broke now, when the pressure was only anticipation, they'd shatter completely when the real attack came. Holding the line wasn't just about stopping intruders. It was about holding themselves together. The test came sooner than expected. Just past midnight, sensors along the western fence triggered simultaneously. The klaxons wailed, searchlights sweeping through the darkness. Ramirez was jolted from the command post, where she'd been updating reports. She grabbed her rifle and sprinted toward the west, heart pounding, boots kicking up mud. By the time she reached the sector, a patrol team was already in position, rifles aimed outward. The fence had been rattled but not breached. The ground bore fresh boot prints, vanishing into the brush. "They were here," a sergeant muttered. "Testing." U.S. Briggs arrived seconds later, eyes cold as he scanned the scene. "They're probing, looking for weakness. Next time, they won't stop at the fence." He turned, his gaze sweeping over the assembled soldiers. "Stay sharp. Tonight isn't over." Hours crawled by. The probe never turned into a full assault. But no one relaxed. The intruders had revealed their hand. They were still out there, watching, waiting. By dawn, Ramirez felt hollowed out, every muscle trembling with fatigue. But she forced herself to stand tall at the final rotation. Her uniform was stained with mud, her hands raw from gripping her rifle, yet her eyes remained steady. And Briggs noticed. As the guards rotated out, he approached her, voice low enough only she could hear. "You've held strong," he said. "Stronger than most." Ramirez swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Praise from him felt heavier than any commendation. "I'm just doing my job, sir," she managed. Briggs' gaze lingered a moment, then he nodded once. "That's what makes it count." By the end of the week, the depot was a fortress. Fences reinforced, patrols hardened, bunkers secured under triple lock. The soldiers were exhausted, but sharper than they had ever been. They had held the line. But Ramirez knew, deep down, it wasn't over. The storm had passed, the breach had been repelled, the probe contained, but something larger loomed. And when it came, she would be ready. Because she was no longer just a guard on forgotten duty. She was a soldier on the front line. The days after the probe blurred into a haze of heightened readiness. The depot was no longer just a place to store ammunition. It was a fortress under siege. Soldiers ate with their rifles slung over their shoulders, boots caked with dried mud, eyes scanning even in the mess hall. Patrols no longer ended with relieved sighs. They ended with quiet nods and a silent understanding that every shift could be the last uneventful one. Specialist Ramirez lived in that rhythm, her body aching from the relentless tempo, but her mind sharp, honed like the edge of a blade. Every lesson Briggs had drilled into them, every sleepless night of drills, every ounce of vigilance, it all hung in the air like a taut wire, waiting for the snap. The snap came just before dawn. The alarm klaxons wailed, cutting through the stillness like a blade. Ramirez bolted upright from her cot, boots laced before her brain fully registered the sound. The radio crackled. Multiple sensors tripped. East and north sectors. Possible coordinated assault. Her heart slammed into her ribs. This wasn't another probe. This was it. She grabbed her rifle, sprinting into the pre-dawn gloom. Floodlights swept wildly, cutting through mist that clung to the earth. The air was alive with shouts, boots pounding against gravel, a metallic clatter of weapons being readied. As Ramirez reached the northern fence, her worst fear was confirmed. The chain link sagged, coils of razor wire cut and pushed aside. Beyond, shadows moved with purpose, dark-clad figures advancing low and fast. "Contact!" someone shouted. Muzzle flashes lit the mist. The depot had come under full assault. Ramirez dropped to a knee, rifle steady, sighting into the tree line. Her first burst caught one of the intruders mid-stride, sending him sprawling. Adrenaline surged, narrowing her world to the thud of her heartbeat and the controlled rhythm of her breathing. The intruders pressed hard, more disciplined than the first wave. They moved in teams, covering each other, returning fire with frightening precision. Bullets tore through sandbags and fence posts, sparks flying from ricochets. But this time, the depot wasn't caught unprepared. Searchlights locked on the breach. Tower-mounted machine guns roared to life, stitching the tree line with suppressive fire. Patrol teams converged from both flanks, herding the attackers into kill zones. Orders snapped over radios, sharp and decisive, echoing with Briggs' voice. Ramirez held her ground at the northern gap, firing, reloading, firing again. Her fingers moved without thought, every motion drilled into muscle memory. She wasn't just a guard anymore. She was part of a defense. A fighting raged for what felt like hours, but could only have been minutes. The attackers pressed, desperate to reach the bunkers, but every advance was met with steel and fire. At one point, Ramirez spotted a pair of intruders breaking off, moving low toward Bunker 12, the same one she had guarded during that midnight conversation with Briggs. Without hesitation, she sprinted, mud sucking at her boots, rifle tight. In her hands, she cut across the open ground, bullets snapping past her ears. She dropped into prone position, sighted and fired. One intruder fell. The second turned, returning fire, rounds kicking dirt inches from her face. Then Briggs was there, moving like a force of nature. His rifle barked 3 controlled shots, and the second intruder crumpled. He glanced at her briefly, rain and mud streaking his face. "Good eyes," he said, before moving to the next sector. The words burned into her chest like a brand. By dawn, the firefight ebbed. The intruders broke, retreating into the tree line, leaving bodies and weapons behind. The depot stood scarred, battered, but unbroken. Ramirez lowered her rifle, chest heaving, ears ringing. Her uniform was soaked with sweat and mud, her arms trembling from the adrenaline crush. Around her, soldiers slumped against bunkers, faces pale with exhaustion, but alive. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire had been. In the aftermath, the depot became a hive of controlled chaos. Medics treated the wounded. Engineers patched fences and reinforced bunkers. Weapons were collected, catalogued foreign-made. Rifles, deer marked with no insignia. Evidence that the attack had been planned, funded, executed with purpose. Ramirez found herself standing guard at the breach once more, rifle across her chest, eyes locked on the tree line. She felt hollowed out, every nerve frayed, but she refused to look away. Briggs approached hours later, his presence as steady as ever. His uniform was caked with the same mud as everyone else's, but he carried himself as though the weight of the depot rested easily on his shoulders. He stopped in front of Ramirez, studying her with that same piercing gaze. "You held the line," he said simply. Ramirez swallowed, throat tight. "I did my job, sir." Briggs shook his head slightly. "You did more than that. You spotted the breach first. You held your sector when others faltered. You moved without hesitation to stop them from reaching Bunker 12. You weren't just doing your job. You were protecting this depot." Her chest tightened. For months, she had doubted her worth, wondered if her assignment here had been punishment, a waste of her skills. But standing there, hearing his words, she realized the truth. She had been exactly where she was needed. Later that day, the entire garrison assembled in the yard between the bunkers. The colonel stood at a makeshift podium, his voice hoarse but steady. "We were tested," he said, "and we endured. This depot is intact because of your vigilance, your discipline, your courage. Last night proved what we already knew, that this post is not forgotten. It is vital. And so are the men and women who defend it." He paused, scanning the ranks. Then his gaze settled on Ramirez. "Specialist Ramirez," he called. Her breath caught. She stepped forward, boots heavy, heart pounding in her ears. The colonel nodded once. "Your actions last night and in the days leading up to it exemplified the discipline and courage we demand of every soldier. You remained vigilant when it mattered most. And because of that, this depot still stands. You have our respect." The soldiers around her, tired, battered, but alive, raised their hands in applause. Even Mills, who had once mocked her endless diligence, clapped hard, his expression free of sarcasm. Ramirez felt heat rise to her face, but she stood tall. Her rifle at her side, eyes forward. She had earned it. As the formation broke, Briggs caught her eye from across the yard. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. His nod was enough, a silent acknowledgement between soldiers who had stood shoulder to shoulder under fire. Ramirez returned the nod, a quiet swell of pride filling her chest. For the first time in her career, she didn't wonder if her efforts mattered. She didn't doubt her place. She knew, because she had guarded the depot. She had seen what others missed. She had stood the line when it threatened to break. And in doing so, she had proven something to herself. No post was too small, no soldier too forgotten. Every watch mattered. Every step mattered. And sometimes it was the quiet vigilance of one soldier that kept the arsenal of a nation safe.